As someone who's been the target of Ofcom investigations on more than one occasion, I thought I would just add a couple of helpful points about what's going on right now with GB News and Ofcom. So the BBC website states that GB News are under investigation by Ofcom into impartiality regarding the Q&A session with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. That happened on the 12th of February. The UK Communications and Broadcast Regulator, that's Ofcom, said it had received around 500 complaints about the programme. And it goes on to say, from Ofcom, we're investigating on rules 5.11 and 5.12 of the Broadcasting Code. And the Broadcasting Code 5.11, 5.12 is essentially about matters to do with impartiality, if it's something to do with kind of politics or public policy. So that's the story, and GB News being investigated, one of any number of investigations happening now against GB News by Ofcom, the regulator. What I wanted to do was talk about what's actually going on, which has nothing to do with 5.11 or 5.12 or matters of impartiality or actually anything to do with rules. What's actually going on right now is much more a kind of war of attrition. So those who want the status quo maintained, the status quo of the news channels that you're allowed to hear from, so BBC, Channel 4, ITV, those who only want those organisations to exist and be the ones that are allowed to tell you news such as they decide to tell it, they want GB News gone. And many of you have worked this out for yourselves quite clearly. Now, in order to get GB News gone, and to get them gone, if maybe you're a supporter of Labour, maybe you're a member of the Muslim Council, you want GB News gone. If you want the Tories to win at the next election, you want more of GB News. If you want Labour to win, you want less of GB News. There's a lot of reasons why people want GB News gone, and any number of them are to do with politics of the thing and also control of the news agenda. So if you're a Guardian reader, believer, writer, you think it's like morally important that you get rid of GB News because that's the only way decent people can hear truth. And you will know that people like Gary Lineker, people who consider themselves to be morally superior, the Refugees Welcome Brigade, that believe they should be the arbiter of what you should be allowed to hear, that you need someone to advocate on your behalf because you're too stupid to be allowed to make up your own mind over something. I mean, it is so rude and so just fundamentally disgusting that people exist that think that you don't have the right to hear opinions and ideas for yourself and make up which ones you believe in. But anyway, this group of the intelligent elite believe that you shouldn't be able to hear GB News. So the method of taking down GB News is the same method that they take with an individual such as myself. So to get me removed from my radio show at LBC, for example, the most listened to Sunday commercial radio show, just saying. And the method is attrition. And the tool is the regulator Ofcom. So what you do is you just keep coordinating complaints into Ofcom. You find something, the Rishi Sunak debate, and you coordinate complaints. So there's 500 that have been submitted to the regulator. Those 500 complaints have been coordinated. They'll be signed at various high levels. You can guarantee all the Board of Deputies will be there with a signature. The Muslim Council will be there with the signature. All of these different organisations with lots of names on the letterheads will be filing their complaints, and then those complaints have to be taken seriously. The reason I know this is because I have been the target and the recipient of this kind of successful war of attrition that ends up with you being removed, or in this case, GB News. Now, GB News are already injured, and those that want GB News shut down know that. They can smell it. They can see blood in the water. They can smell it. It's like sharks. As soon as they see the weakness, then they're in for the kill. And the weakness was already revealed. Once GB News started shedding presenters that they were frightened about how much they were saying. So Lawrence Fox, we knew that he would be gone within a matter of moments after he spoke out in support of Tommy and I. We saw Mark Stein removed because Ofcom complaints against him were successful. And so GB News tried to make it that Mark Stein would have to pay his own Ofcom fines. And that clearly is not a situation that can be tolerated by any presenter, because you'd be frightened every time you open your mouth. And you can feel it already, just like you could feel it when it happened at Fox News. You can feel those constraints coming in on the presenters. You can feel them have to be ever more cautious about what they say and what they can't say. There are some safe subjects like trans where they will go and they will debate, but there's other subjects they won't go near. They won't touch them because they're too close to the borderline of getting another Ofcom complaint. And so that's where this Overton window also shuts down. The presenters are on edge because they know that any Ofcom complaint against them they'll be in major doo-doo. And right now at GB News, I'm not inside that organisation, as you'll appreciate, but there'll be any number of Ofcom briefings and how to avoid Ofcom complaints and why, individuals must be so cautious against getting Ofcom complaints. And I think the point that I'm trying to get to here is the news will direct you to 5.11 or 5.12 under the code. It has nothing to do with that. This is to do with big owners of news as it currently stands, The Guardian, ITV, BBC, trying to protect their monopoly on what the news is. Because ultimately, why shouldn't GB News be out there on the media landscape? And why shouldn't they be having a say? And what does it matter? This was my argument at LBC always. What does it matter? If I'm speaking my mind, people know that I'm not impartial at all. I have very strong views. I don't apologise for anything I ever said. I stand by everything I've ever said, but I'm not impartial. And hence I would have callers on all of the time to say the opposite viewpoint. And isn't that a marvellous thing? So why is it these other news channels simply cannot tolerate GB News even existing? And the horrible truth is they assume people are so stupid they need someone to be able to advocate for what they're allowed to hear. And that is the biggest insult of all. Now, I should disclose at this point, I have zero reason to be in any way trying to illuminate what's actually going on with Ofcom and The Guardian and the left and the Muslim Council and the pro-Palestine lobby and all the rest trying to get rid of GB News. I am banned from GB News. That's a decision that's been made by the owner, as are many other individuals that I know. And there's a comedy in this as well. So I am often approached by new producers. I know when someone's got a new producer, like when there's a new producer and they're like, oh, let's get Katie on, she'd do great. And so they invite me onto whoever's show. And I have to be the one that tells them, oh, you better go and have a little chat with someone higher up because I'm banned from GB News. And then it goes very quiet. I would encourage those producers, don't feel embarrassed. I know, and it's okay. But that's kind of, the point isn't about me and the fact that I'm not even allowed on there because GB News are so terrified of actually having honest opinions being heard, because they're terrified of the consequence, because they're fighting a battle to even stay on air. And if you lose GB News, what then? What else is left? And it's why I always say that you have to park your own personal emotions on things. So you have to park the fact that you're banned. So how can you possibly represent freedom of speech? What you have to say is that you're glad that that platform at least is trying to still be there in an environment that's virtually damn impossible, to be quite honest with you. So, overall, just to let you know that this isn't really about Ofcom as a organisation. This really isn't about any clauses in the Ofcom regs, and this really isn't about a Rishi Sunak debate. This is about a war of attrition, and that eventually enough Ofcom complaints, enough investigations, enough time-consuming process, enough reducing the amount of things that people are free to say. You just keep knocking away, knocking off presenters one by one, targeting them one by one, and eventually you get rid of GB News and the old boys go back to their monopoly of kind of, as I would say, leftist propaganda, but stuff that they can absolutely control. So I just thought it would be helpful to offer some insights into how this thing is actually working. And I will end, if I may, with just a brief and yet funny story. So every time there's an Ofcom complaint that is taken seriously enough for Ofcom to have an investigation, let's take my time at LBC. On the radio, there was a complaint that I had been overtly offensive, I think. And so you get called in by the boss, in my case, a very small man that I really couldn't tolerate, because actually the boss of LBC realistically is James O'Brien, because he controls everything. Regardless, I was called into the office and I had to, and then they read out the transcript of the radio of what happened when you were on air. And you have to, and they have legal present in the room, so it's like it's serious meeting. And you have to not defend yourself, but explain what went on. You know, did you take other viewpoints? Did you listen? And one time, there were many investigations into me for this same reason. One time it was because I'd come back from the Trump inauguration and then the pussy marches the next day from Clinton supporters. And I was complaining about the Clinton feminists or the feminazis banging on about their vaginas, because they all had signs saying, you know, my vagina is made of steel. These are these really ugly feminazis, you know. It's all about birth control and all the rest of it. My vagina is made of steel. They were everywhere, those signs, on the day after the inauguration of Trump. And so I was on air expanding about my experiences in DC at the inauguration and at the pussy marches that I attended. And I went, why do they have to brag? I can fit a can of cause in my vagina sideways. And that was the Ofcom complaint. And what really annoyed me was that my little manager, or the boss at LBC, when he read it, obviously the comedy is in the punctuation. I can fit a can of cause in my vagina, comma, sideways. And what really annoyed me, and still does, is that he missed the comma. And as you will appreciate, that's absolutely where the comedy of that phrase was at. Anyway, that was an Ofcom complaint actually about my vagina. So that's an overview of what's actually going on. If you've taken the trouble to stick with me through that, then you're a better man than most. But I will say, regardless of being banned from GB News, it is important that ordinary people have access to all different sorts of opinions, because as long as we can say that we don't have to agree, what can possibly be the harm in hearing all sides? And that, to me, seems to be the most impartial rationale of all.